Welcome, everyone. This is a very special video. I might say that all the time, but I am very excited about this video, which we're calling Ancestor Theater, Understanding Voice Acting on an Altar. Come on. Okay, so I'm a voice actor. It's probably one of my favorite things in the world, and you can find out more about my voice acting on my current podcast drama. This is How We Live and Die. So I do a lot of voice acting in that. And it's basically my live multiverse memoir. And so in any given episode of that podcast drama, you'll get a wide range of different characters that I interact with in my everyday ancestor healing journey. And as I engage this, wild adventure through the multiverse that is my everyday life. And so you'll find me doing all these kind of different voices throughout the podcast. And so today on this video, though, little spoiler alert, I am currently taking voice lessons with one of my favorite singers, that has been a favorite singer of mine since I was like my late teens. I found this singer named M. Griner. Um, and yeah, I haven't actually told anyone that I'm doing this, including my close friends. So, surprise, I'm taking voice lessons with my favorite singer. Isn't that cool? And so this video is actually a little bit a part of my homework this week. So our homework, it's a group coaching cohort thing. Our homework was to put our voice out there in the world in whatever way that we decide to. Um, and so I thought about singing, what am I going to do? I'm going to sing a song. But then I felt like, yeah, I want to do something a little different. And I want to bring voice acting to this YouTube channel. And I want to study some of my favorite signature cartoon voices that have come up through my voice acting journey, and that have shown up in my theater work in different places. And so in this video, I want to take you on a behind the scenes of how I do these voices. And this was really cool for me because I hadn't really taken the time to sit down and study, like when I do my voice acting. I just have voices that kind of come out and I let them come out. But this was really, really cool to sit down and study the fundamentals of what I'm actually doing with my voice here. How do I make these particular sounds? Um, and then I went, into the ancestor theater portion of, my practice is how do I then map, those fundamentals of voice acting on an altar for abolitionist ancestor theater. So why are we doing that? Because that is what we do here. So on this here YouTube channel in the year of our goddess 2026, I am taking folks through a village-wide ancestor artist residency called A Friendship That Can Withstand the Revolution. So there's many components to the residency, but there is a public component to it. And so that is where all the content that I share publicly, whether it's on my YouTube or social media or whatever, podcast included, whatever I'm sharing publicly has something specific to teach us about the ancestor guidance emerging for this specific moment in time and for this specific day. And that has something important to offer us by way of guidance, insight, and direction. And so, as we're going through this residency, I'm going to be continuing to pull out the ancestor medicine and keep it, pull out the gems and put it on what I'm calling a timekeeping calendar. And so I'll link all that below if you want to follow along. But today, let's just get into it. I want to talk to you about two voices that I want to study and break down today. Two of my voice acting voices. So one character is maybe most dear to my heart. She's called Spiderwoman. You have heard her before on this YouTube channel, actually, and on my podcast. And she sounds something like this. Remember when we walked the earth as giants. So she has that low voice, okay? And you little humans, what do you know about the giants? Okay, so she kind of goes up and down. She has that, She's not a villain, but she has a little bit of a villain voice. Let's say that. Okay, so I want to talk about that voice. And then another favorite voice of mine has actually been coming out of my voice lately, but this character hasn't shown up actually in any of my podcast episodes yet. So you're probably hearing him for the first time here. And I don't even know his name yet. But he sounds something like this. I call him my wise elder. Hello, I'm the wise elder. That's that voice. Okay? So those are the two voices we're going to be studying on an altar. Cool, right? All right. Let me take you to my teaching board, which is everyone's favorite part of my YouTube videos. When I take you to my crazy mural board. Okay. Mapping abolitionist ancestor theater, voice acting on an altar. Okay? So here is the altar that we'll be looking at today. And this is what I mean by mapping it on an altar. Okay, so what does this all mean? First of all, I want to take you to this is who I'm studying with right now. M. Greiner, singer, songwriter, vocal coach. See, this is my 21-year-old self right here. When I told her that her 41-year-old self is taking voice lessons with her favorite singer. She's like, "What?" Okay, so this is mgriner.com. And so along with this homework this week of sharing something of your voice out into the world, she taught me part of her course, we study the five different voices. And that's what I'm going to be playing with today. So that's part of my homework is putting my voice out into the world. I want to study the the voices that I do, um, according to this framework. So this framework helped me um, figure out what I'm doing with the voices that I just shared with you. And I hadn't learned this before. And so, yeah, if you want to check out mgriner.com and everything that she has to offer, you can go visit her website. And so these were the five different voices that we were playing with today. She took us through dull, less dull, natural, nasal, and more nasal. Okay. And what's the point of going through, putting your voice through these different five voices? What I understood is that, this is a way to warm up your voice, and this is a way to sort of bring relaxation to the voice so that you can, yeah, warm it up and do interesting things with it. Um, so this is what these five different voices sound like as I was playing with it. We're gonna go dull, less dull, natural, nasal, and more nasal. I don't know. I guess I'll just sing like hot cross buns or something, right? So if I'm doing a dull voice, it sounds like this. Uh, uh. Less dull. Natural. Nasal. Uh, More nasal. And I recommend, if you really want to bug someone, I recommend just like walking into their room and doing this exercise. And so how am I making those different sounds, right? Like dull, I'm bringing it like way in the back of my throat. And nasal, I'm putting it all the way in my nose. Versus okay? And then natural is just like the natural voice, right? Okay, so anytime anyone says five of anything, I'm like, I automatically think of the altar because the altar has five directions, right? North, east, south, west, and center. So I was like, I wonder what would happen if you put these voices on an altar and also map them out with the rest of what you find on each position on that altar. So I want to take a couple minutes to break down, what exactly we're looking at here. Um, so in the altar that I work with, In the south, we have earth. West is water. North is sky and air. East is fire. In the center, we have ether, or we have all-encompassing everything. Um, and we also, that is the altar that I work with in my personal spiritual practice. And I also want to say, this isn't a definitively anything. I'm sharing my practice with you. There's many different traditions, and many different ancestries that will map their altars differently, right? And you might find the elements in slightly different places, or whatever their tradition is their tradition. And so I'm not saying that this is what it is. That's kind of a general rule whenever I share anything. I'm sharing my practice with you for the purpose of inspiration and learning. And even, what I map, tomorrow or next month might change. I might put these five different voices in different places, in another, um, yeah, at another time, or even the elements, right? So everything here is sort of up for, playfulness, but also, I always refer back to my teachings and where my practice comes from. So that's a little, disclaimer. Um, but so what you're seeing here is this is in my spiritual practice where Earth is. However, I also work with astrology, right? And so I also work with celestial theater. And so celestial theater is my practice of combining astrology with theater, and ancestor healing. So the elements land in a different place in the birth chart because on the west here we have fire. We have the ascendant, we have the sunrise. And this is usually coincides with Aries, the sign Aries. On the east, we have the descendant, and so that's the sunset. And so right across here is the horizon, right? And we have air, and we usually get Libra over here. Um, and then the IC, which is associated with Cancer, that's water. And then the MC is Earth, Capricorn. So here, at the bottom of the chart is where you get your roots. It's where you get your home, belonging, ancestry. And then the MC is where you get your public persona, your legacy, what your life's work is, what you're leaving behind in the world, kind of thing, what you're working on while you're here and what you're leaving behind. Okay. Um, Now, because we're bringing this whole resident, this altar work back to theater, I'm also mapping theater positions on the altar. So we have the stage manager in the south, the writer in the west, the teacher plus dramaturg plus audience in the north, and the director in the east, and the actor in the center. Um, but when we work with Ancestor Theater, it is for the stage. We do create works for the stage, but Ancestor Theater is really about life. It's really about the artistry of life. It's about the ceremony of life. And this whole residency that we're doing is calling us back home to a global thriving village. And why do we work with Ancestor Theater? It's one of the most powerful things that we can work with and engage with and invest in and pour ourselves into in order to become that global thriving village. What Ancestor Theater does for us is when we, engage with it, when we devote to it, um, we're talking about an intentional lived experience, an intent engaging an intentional healing process, an intentional process of personal and collective transformation. And so when we just follow that process, it leads us back home, right? And so that really takes us out of these colonial ways of thinking, right? Of like, how do we figure out how to get there versus ground an entire process that is, guided by the ancient and also the future, right? And you don't have to figure it out. You just have to listen and follow that process and it guides you there. It helps you become it. And that's why we have the actor in the center, because the actor is about becoming someone, right? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about why I put these roles in these specific places. We have the writer in the West. I really thought the writer belongs in the West because the West is the hardest work that we do. It's where we grieve, it's where we fall apart, it's where we learn, the most painful spiritual lessons and, material lessons. Sometimes it is also where you receive the biggest gifts, the biggest payoff that might sometimes be in a quiet place, not to be confused with that John Krasinski movie. That's a horror movie. But no, like you receive those gifts that might be quiet, but they actually mean the most to you. And I think writing is like that. West is also, a very abused water, right? Abused by patriarchy, right? And kind of seen as this like fluffy, irrational. Oh, it's so easy. It's cute, but it's not the real work. Where actually in the West, we do the real work. It's that mothering work. It's that nurturing work, nurturing the planet work, right? And I think of writing in that way, where, I think writing, oh, you're just a writer, you're fluffy, you're sitting around writing poetry. But writing is also like, it's about everything that had to live and die in order for you to tell your story. It's about how you had to shatter thousands of times before you found your voice, right? It's about how you almost didn't make it to the table to pick up that pen and write something down. That's writing. That's that, and especially if we're talking about abolitionist ancestor theater, that's writing. Um, and then we look at, so that's water, and then in terms of celestial theater, we have the ascendant here, fire. It's the sunrise, it's birth, it's where you rise, it's the beginning, right? This is the fire of the new he of a new hero's journey, right? You're the protagonist. You tell your own story. This is also the will to be yourself and to say something to the world or to yourself that nobody else can say but you. And so we do have this blend, right, of that fire and water both live here with the writer in very particular ways. So East, the director, East is fire. East is where we vision. We see the whole picture, right? We see things that nobody else can see. We see them before they are made reality. And the director here, it's your name on the line. And I think of fire as our name, you know? It's your name on the line when it's your movie, right? When it's your piece that you're directing. You're responsible for everything and everyone. It's a huge responsibility. Um, but it's also descendant, right? Like descendant is air in celestial theater. And so there is an element of like when you show up to set or rehearsal, like you got to be that air. You got to be observant. You got to be calm. You got to be like, know everybody's strengths and you got to, be a really good people person and put people in the right roles where everyone can shine. You got to do that kind of relational labor. That's all like air and Libra. Um, and yeah, there is something about the sunset here, right? Um, as a director, you're bound to the light, especially in film, right? Uh, if you miss your shot with the light, you miss your shot, and it's just over. The day's over. And so if we bring that back to like the ceremony of life, right? There's something here about the director really has to learn how to make friends with death. Has to make friends with life and death on a really deep level. Has to be, aware of that like circadian rhythm um, of your life cycles, right? Um, and yeah, you really have to learn how to be friends with life and death in that way. And you have to bring that to set when you're a director, right? And when you engage ancestor theater, you will be tasked in your life to learn the lessons that your story is asking, everyone to learn as a whole, and you're going to be tasked to be a leader of learning those lessons, right? And so you have to be willing to become a version of yourself that can hold this story, right? So we have the medicine of fire is about the will to become something, the will to transform. Um, the water, the writer is about the will to just say the thing. And the will of the director is to hold the whole story and pay it reverence. And I think about the director as the one who has to the part where this is about sunset. You're the one who has to let it go. You're the one who has to give, you have to know when your story is done and you have to give it to the world. You have to make that call. And I was thinking about this. The writer doesn't have to let it go. That's what I'm saying today. I might say something else on another day, and in fact, I remember that I did. But for today's conversation, I really feel like there's a truth to that, that the writer doesn't have to let the story go. The writer just has to give her work to the director, a director that she trusts. And even if you're writing a book and it's just you, I would say that it's not the writer in you who makes the decision that your story is done and that it's time to go see the world. That's the director in you who has to make that call. And we're really thinking about grief work as both, both East and West. Um, and I think about, the grief journey here, this act of love that fire gives water. So to know that the writer, after everything that lived and died in you to tell this story, after everything you nurtured and held and how you had to protect this story and how you weathered so many storms and you kept it alive. You really kept it alive, right? There's something there's something in there that's like as director, as fire, as East, as your partner on the other side of this, I won't be the one to also make you let it go, right? That's too much to ask of you because the writer, you could just keep going forever. But it's the director's job to come in one day and say, look at the light. It's time. It's good enough. We have to give this to the world now. And again, this can happen between two different individuals on a team project, but first and foremost, this is a dance, between the writer inside of you and the director inside of you in life, right? So, North, who you give your story to. I put teacher, dramaturg, and audience up here, right? Because it's so important. These are different phases of your development. Um, even what in a creative project, but also in life, in a spiritual journey. Right? Like it's so important to have a trusted teacher, a trusted, council of, first round editors, people who really have your back and can understand you when you're messy and in process because your audience doesn't care. Your audience is like hoping for perfection. They want to be moved. They're like, we don't understand you when you're messy and in process but you need someone who does. Um, And then the dramaturg kind of comes in the middle process between the teacher and the audience. The dramaturg kind of sits in between the audience and the work itself and can give you really good feedback. Um, so, you might not be ready for that bigger audience just yet, but this is a very important protection mechanism here. That I hold the line. I hold the line and I really, want the best for you and your work. And I'm going to give you some really good feedback before it goes out into this larger ocean. And then finally you have the audience, right? Where whether it's in your spiritual journey or your creative journey, you're ready to face the world. You're ready to give something to a bigger and wider reality. Now, the stage manager, um, in the South, Earth, the devotion to physical reality. So the stage manager is the one who holds shit down, holds the physical workload of the entire company. And often unsung, often unnoticed, not the glamorous, sexy role, but nothing works without them, right? They they manage things. Um, and they hold everything together. And in altar work, often we find, the rocks, the mountain spirits, the trees, the big, the earth spirits that really act as guardians who anchor the entire process. You can have the producer down here too. Um, and in our process here, our artist residency, we're putting our village artist accessibility grant that we're raising through this process and our village artist grant ecosystem that we are researching through this process in this area of the South. So this village artist grant ecosystem is the anchor of the entire residency. And it's really asking those, seminal questions that accessibility asks, not of just us, but of our entire village, right? Like, what support do we need as a collective to really honor the limits of each and every person's individual body? This is where we honor the body. And all the unique expressions that we have of our embodiment, especially the ones that fall outside of able-bodiedness, because those are the lived experiences that are disenfranchised and under attack so often. And so here, this Village Artist Grant ecosystem is about a collective financial organizing system that makes it possible for us to continue doing anything at all, any of this. Okay, and then the middle, we have humanity. We have the human and itty. Um, and then, yeah, we have the actor, of course, the one who lives, the one who puts their body on the line in order to bring the world to life. Okay, so now we have a basis of what we're going to study when we study the two different voices that I mentioned. The wise elder and Spider-Woman. Let's start with the wise elder. Okay, let's bring this wise elder back into the room. He has something to say. So, like I said before, these voices just kind of came out of me, and I didn't really understand what I was doing, but I took the time to try and figure out what I was doing with my voice to make that voice. And I realized that that I'm mixing. How do I make that voice? This is the wise elder. What am I doing with my voice? If we look at this dull, less dull, natural, nasal, more nasal, I'm actually mixing the dull with the nasal. And I didn't know that I was doing that, and it was exciting when I figured that out. Okay? So a dull voice sounds like this, but I'm doing something different. So I'm using that dull voice. So I'm sending my voice back in my throat, but I'm sending it up through my nasal. And that's how I'm mixing it. I'm sitting here in the place where my voice is sitting at the back with that dull frequency, but I'm sending it through my nasal. If I didn't send it through my nasal, it would sound more like this. Okay? And it's really important. This is really important. It's not the other way around because it's not that I'm sitting in the nasal and throwing it to my dull or sending it to my dull. Because if I did that, this is my nasal voice. This is my nasal voice if I'm mixing it with dull, but I'm sitting in the nasal and I'm sending it to the dull. That sounds like Jennifer Coolidge, right? So that's what those two different voices sound. that's the difference between sitting in the dull and sending it in the nasal, and sitting in the nasal and sending it to the dull. This is where you sit in the dull and send it to the nasal, or where you sit in the south and you send it to the north. And this is where you sit in the north and you send it to the south. Cool, right? And that was really cool to look at because what does it mean when you sit somewhere, your location, but you're directing your voice somewhere else? That's altar work, right? So when we sit in collective ceremony, what it means to sit in any one direction. In my practice, you go through seasons of life just sitting in one direction, right? So when I began my official ancestor healing journey, I was sitting in the north for many years, actually. Um, and what that means is that when you have somewhere to sit, you're learning the lessons that that body of life has to teach you. Um, so if you sit in the north, you're learning the lessons of spirit, of sky, of the otherworldly. You're learning how to connect with the otherworldly. You're learning how to connect with ancestors. If you're sitting in the south, you're really learning the lessons of the body, of what it means to be a human, right? On the spiritual experience, you're learning, yeah, accessibility stuff. And so, I might have, and that's the thing about altar work, right? Like one day you'll just wake up and you'll realize like, oh, I've moved, I've shifted. Something really big in my life has transformed and I'm done with this area. And that's when we, give our gratitude and go through an end of life phase with a particular place in the altar so that we can move to another place to sit, to another direction where we send our voice or where we can see things differently. And yeah, and so I'm sitting in the South right now. I'm sitting in the South. Um, and that's why, I'm working, I'm being the embodiment of this Village Artist Grant ecosystem, this Village Artist Accessibility Grant. That's why I've been on this, right? That's why I'm doing this at all, because I'm sitting in the South and I'm sending my voice to the North to an audience. I'm sending it to students and teachers. I'm saying, I have something. Let's learn from it. That's literally what this residency is, right? If you're in a major grief period, you're probably sitting in the West. Probably. Not always. But West is where we grieve, right? Um, but when we grieve, often when we're in the thick of that underworld, right? We're also looking at the East. We're looking straight ahead at that fire, at what's on the other side, the aliveness that will birth out of you when you get to the other side of a grief journey. And I think it's so important to have a vision of that East. It's so important when you're in the thick of a really intense shadow and underworld journey, or end of life phase or transition or grief or death period, right? You have to be able to look at something that's on the other side of it, or else you will get lost. And so, yeah, this voice of the wise elder is really illuminating where I'm sitting right now and the ancestral task at hand, right? I'm sitting in the South. I'm talking about accessibility. I'm talking about, new economy work, and I'm sending it to an audience. And that's the time period in which this voice emerged. Thank you to the wise elder. Now, something I realized was really important about this voice too is that it would be really easy for me to constrict. It would be really easy for me to um, tighten my throat here in order to make that voice. Like this, right? Like if you want to make a voice like that, it's easy to constrict here. However, I'm not doing that. I'm using um, my diaphragm. And that's something that M. Griner teaches us, really, really deeply, is that belly breath, that belly breath from the diaphragm. And so I'm really breathing from the diaphragm in order to make this voice. And so I'm not hurting my voice at all. It doesn't hurt. When I talk like this, it does hurt, and I wouldn't be able to sustain it. And so, what that actually translates into, right? Constricting our voice like this, our throat chakra, is the equivalent of a culture that only builds wealth through buying and selling, through capitalism, but never fully resources the inherent labor of life, which is your full body, never goes deeper, right? And that's what we're doing here in this Village Artist Grant ecosystem. We're building a technology, a methodology, a collective organizing system that actually honors the fact that there's all this kind of labor that goes into making a voice, that goes into telling a story, that goes into selling something, right? But we have cultures where we're never inspired to just resource each other's labor. But that labor is about the full body, and it is about breathing through the full body and speaking from there. And not and constricting everything to this, more higher place of just buying, selling, buying, selling, buying, selling. It hurts the voice, and it you will run out of steam, and the whole mess of other problems, right? So that's another really cool link between how our voice work mirrors the ceremonial, ancestral, and political work that we're doing here in this residency. Okay. Thank you, wise elder. Okay, let's talk about Spider-Woman. Remember who she is? Remember when we walked the earth as giants. One of my favorite voices to do. I love doing that low voice. But the one of the really interesting things that I learned um when studying how I make that voice is I realized it sounds like I'm lowering my pitch, right? This Spider-Woman voice, it sounds like it's a lower pitch than my regular speaking voice, right? But it's not. Listen, remember when we walked the earth as giants. Remember when we walked the earth as giants. I'm not real. I might be slightly lowering the pitch, but not really. It's the same pitch. What am I actually doing with my voice? I'm sitting in the center. I'm using my natural voice, but I'm sending it to the dull. So I'm mixing the natural and the dull. This is my natural voice. This is Spider-Woman. Sorry. This is Spider-Woman's voice. So there is something about my natural voice that I'm mixing and really sending it to the back of my throat to create this really rich, full-bodied sound that sounds really deep and low. And it is, because I have a naturally deep voice. And I do take it to a lower pitch. But it's not actually about the pitch that makes that deep sound. And that was kind of mind-blowing. I'm like, it's not about the pitch. I never really thought about it. But it is about really mixing the natural and the dull here. That's what I feel I'm doing. Um, Yeah, and if you really think about so Spider-Woman is the ancestor that helped me create this Village Artist Grant ecosystem. And that's why, if you'll see some of my work, part of what emerges from doing this new economy work in my company is called the Spider-Woman Network, right? And so that's kind of where I'm housing this work that we're doing. Um, and that's why I named it after her because this is about her. Not just as a character, but as a living ancestor that lives really deep within me. And this is really looking at the IC and this point of water, right? This it was born from grief. I made a post on my Instagram, recently talking about how Spider-Woman emerged for me because I wrote a play and she's like the narrator of the play. Um, and that's the line that I keep saying, remember when we walked the earth as giants. That's the first one of her first monologue. She says that in this play that I wrote called Pluto. And in my Instagram post I wrote about how um this voice emerged. I wrote that play because of Humpty Dumpty, because of something that broke that couldn't be put back together. And in that breaking apart, it's gone, it's done. But the gift of that breaking apart is that something else rises that was deeper, a deeper commitment to life, a deeper commitment to your voice. And that's who Spider-Woman was. That's what that play is, right? And so she's kind of the guardian of that entire play. And that's why, we have I see water, the place of home here, of ancient memory. Um, and so she's really, an ancient memory within me that represents that ancient wisdom, right? And when you mix that ancient wisdom with the center, with the natural, with the here and now, um, it's about embodying that now. It's about embodying that ancient wisdom in the here and now. But it's not about let's go back to the good old days, right? It's not about that because I'm not sitting in the dull and sending it to the center. It's not about like, oh, I wish I could go back. It's about sitting here in the center. I'm sitting here, but I'm mixing it with the dull. And that means that this is about living for now. This is about bringing it into the now. It's not about going back to somewhere where it used to be good, right? It's about and not even feeling like, oh, I was born for a different time, which I've felt in many times in my life, right? Like I was born in the wrong time period. I'm from the future, I'm from the past, like no one gets me here. Um, but this medicine is really about saying, no, I am meant for right now, right here, but I'm referring back. I'm referring back to that ancient wisdom. I'm referring back to it and I'm bringing it forward and I'm bringing it out and I'm allowing it to rise through grief, through love, through joy, through everything, through abolitionist friendship. I'm allowing that ancient wisdom to rise and come forward and become become my body, become my embodiment today and live for today. Yeah. So Spider-Woman is such like a dear character and relationship to me, right? And I feel like that really is mirrored here in the way that I am sitting here, but I'm always referring back to her. And there's something about like, I'm learning how to be a human in this lifetime, but I'm also referring back to this like giant spider creature that sounds really creepy and scary and sounds like a villain, but is actually just really misunderstood. Um, and actually the very first line in the play that she says, "Why so ugly? Why so feared?" So we're talking about, my relationship with the ugly, my relationship with the monstrous, like this giant spider, the otherworldly, and who like everyone is afraid of, right? But AKA Pluto, death, the planet of death and rebirth. Everyone's afraid of death, right? But to me, she's a beloved. And she is who I'm doing this for. And she is who I'm constantly referring back to. That I won't leave you behind. And so the really cool thing about Spider-Woman is that, what I said about the pitch, right? It's not just about going to a lower pitch. It's about, um, see, remember when we walked the earth as giants, do you? See how I go up and down, right? So I can still I'm I can change my pitch, but not my location or my direction, right? So I'm still sitting here in the natural, sending it to my dull. And in that place, I can go up and I can go down, but each time it's my natural voice mixed with the dull. Same thing. And I thought about that and how that is like such beautiful medicine for this hour, for our lifetime, right? Is like when you can find a space that's yours and just sit there. This is about, sitting in your seat of power. This is about, sitting in your lane, in the center of your lane, where you shine, where you are supposed to learn your lessons, right? Like that is my lesson. I'm learning how to be human. I'm learning how to bring this ancient wisdom and live for today. And when I can always remember that, then I can travel anywhere and I can still be that. But when I move out of that, traveling is harder. I mean, that's from my spiritual journey, right? Um, That's what I wrote down here, right? It's like when you know how to sit there in your shine and then in the place where you are supposed to sit, then you can play. Then you are truly free to move. And that is where I want to drop the mic because as we enter, I'm recording this on February 12th, and we're about to enter the year of the fire horse and say goodbye to the year of the wood snake. And we have this incredibly beautiful collaboration between the wood snake and the fire horse that is just emerging through me sharing this class with you. Because the wood snake was about telling us to sit there, sit where you are supposed to sit last year, 2025, right? Sit here and develop your workload. Nurture it, love it, engage with it. Like this is yours. Pour love into it before you go running off to other places, right? But now that you truly know how to sit here, now you are free to move. And now the wood snake gives over her medicine and her lessons to the fire horse. I mean, come on. This is ancestor theater. I did not expect to land that. I did not expect to say anything about the wood snake and the fire horse, but that's what ancestor theater is, and that's what our timekeeping mission is, right? So through this ancestor artist residency, I'm just gonna show up and put out some content that's on my heart, and I'll follow the process. And in the process, it brought us to what we are supposed to do here in this residency is pull out the gems and the medicine of the current moment. And that's what this is. It's about this beautiful blending between the wood snake and the fire horse. It's about honoring this time that we're in. I think it's just about saying thank you, right? It's about saying thank you to what we learned last year of how to sit here and develop the workload. And that now that we know how to do that, we're free to move. All right. So I think I'll leave you with that. Um, yeah, I'll leave you with that tonight. Check out the links below. Follow along the email list if you want to keep up with the artist residency and all the content we're putting out. Um, you can check out, there's a timekeeper's calendar that I'll be um, updating with the work and the gems and the wisdom that we're pulling out through this process. And at the end, um, and you can also participate, right, on your own. And there are also many layers of collaboration if you want to go deeper um, into the residency. You can check out all the information in that link. But even if you just want to follow along, you can do that, right? You can follow, keep your own journal, right? Time keep yourself and bring out the gems and the wisdom that are coming out of your own practice. And then at the end, we're going to host a huge um, town hall celebration where we're going to come together and put the most yeah, powerful lessons that we learned over the last, over 2026, and we're going to put it all in a giant map and see what happens with that. So, yeah, definitely follow along and check out all the different ways to participate. Learn more about the Village Artist Grant ecosystem that we're creating. And also check out M. Griner's website, especially if you're interested in vocal coaching. She's an amazing teacher and a wonderful musician and artist. I love her music. And what else do I have to say? That's it for now. That's it for now. I'll see you next time. All right? Peace. Again, the very awkward time between me figuring out how to stop recording. Okay, I figured it out. Bye.